Hey, Bible Quizzers. Just going to share my notes on chapter 7 with you in summary. Remember that from chapter 6, we still remember what Jesus told us his sermon was all about. Seek first God's kingdom and God's righteousness. And that's definitely going to be what this chapter is about as well. Because we're talking about God's righteousness, God's justice, that's still the theme Jesus has to add. Justice doesn't mean judging others. And in fact, we ought to be careful about the measure we use when we judge others, because that measure will be used to measure us as well. That's the sort of justice in God's judgment of every person. And he said the same thing about forgiveness in chapter 6. Remember, however you forgive others, that is how you can also expect to be forgiven. Ooh. If you came across verse 6 and thought, what in the world is this doing here? Is this out of place? You're not the first person that's thought that. Lots of people have argued about exactly what this verse means. And a little bit further down, keep in mind that when Jesus calls you evil and says, if you then, being evil, the usage and meaning of the word evil has changed a lot since Jesus' time, so don't worry too much about him calling you that, you evil villain. In verse 12, Jesus adds that we should do unto others whatever we would have them do to us. This is one of our memory verses. It's also known as the Golden Rule, because Jesus said it sums up the whole law and the prophets. If you want to know what justice is about in a word, it's about doing to others what you'd have them do to you. Or, in other words, it's about love, right? The last section of chapter 7 focuses on the harder, narrow road of discipleship, of following Jesus. Not everybody's going to go this way, he says. It's the harder gate that leads to life, and there are few who find it. And he mentions true and false prophets, true and false disciples, and says, by their fruit you will recognize them. So this metaphor is very important. Fruit, probably a metaphor for acts of righteousness, acts of goodness, like the fruit of the Spirit Paul wrote about in Galatians, which is goodness, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. This is how you will know true disciples, because they produce these fruits of righteousness. They live like Jesus. They live right. And notice in the end, Jesus says it's all about the one who does the will of my Father in heaven, who puts it into practice, not just someone who knows about justice, who knows about righteousness, but who practices righteousness. That's how you'll tell a true disciple. That's what a wise man is. It's not that they have all kinds of things swimming around in their brain. It's that they build their house. They build their life on the righteousness of God. They put it into practice. And by practice, they become righteous. They become holy as God is holy. Finally, it says that he taught as one having authority, which I take to mean, in other words, he talked about righteousness like he knew what he was talking about, which he did, because he perfectly practiced this righteousness that he preached, unlike the teachers of the law, who preached it in many ways, but didn't quite practice it.